Well, welcome everybody. Welcome to Celebrate Recovery. Woohoo! Glad you're here. Gotta go way down for me, as you guys know. It's good to be here, and if you're new, especially want to welcome you. My name's Al Tobiason, and I am a believer who's overcome alcohol and drugs and working on a bunch of other stuff in my life, and we're going to talk about that a little bit tonight. We're going to have the band back in a little bit, but I want to give a shout out to those who are being baptized tonight. And if your family, this is a great time. This is an awesome thing to celebrate. We're just really excited for these folks. You know, I was looking back over some of our announcements from the past, and it was exactly 2 years ago we were announcing that next week we would be moving from the Salvation Army Center of Worship over here. So next week is actually our 2-year anniversary over here at South Shore Church. And as a result of that, we've grown immensely. We've doubled in size, basically, and many have come to work a program that's working in their lives and come into a relationship with Jesus Christ, and that's what we're going to talk about here tonight. Before we do, something really cool happened, and it's really an answer to prayer. Months ago, we were hoping that one day we would be able to go into the Sarasota County Jail with Celebrate Recovery, and that prayer was answered last week. They contacted us. And 5 of us had a meeting with 4 of the Lieutenant Tracy? Who's it, Kelly? There you are. Hi. Tracy, and they came over and we sat down with them for about an hour and a half, showing them some of the videos of what we did. And so on January 7th, well, let me back up. Most of you are familiar with the recovery pods. They have, I think, 2 men's recovery pods and 1 woman's recovery pods. Am I correct on that? Is that right? Right? Right, okay. And they're starting a new pod, and it's called the Reentry Pod. And this will be actually where general population, anybody from within the jail, men, I think they're working on a women's program, will be able to come into this pod for 90 to 120 days. And what this will do is help equip them for that big day when they're released, so that they're just not released to the street with no support. And between Purpose House and Celebrate Recovery, we're really hoping that when they land, you know, when they walk out, they're going to have identification, they're going to have bus passes, they're going to have a ride to get somewhere, they're going to have housing arranged for them. But most of all, that first Sunday night, they're going to be here on Sunday night coming to Celebrate Recovery, because we've been in there, so it's pretty cool. So I'm going to give just kind of a brief message tonight that I was supposed to give last week, and we're going to talk about God's will. And when I got home from church last week, at about 12:30, I walked into the house and the room started spinning, and that was kind of weird because I hadn't had any mood-altering chemicals in my system. I used to kind of live for that, and you know, and then I laid down, and then the bed was spinning, and it was like, I don't like this being sober, you know. But anyhow, it was a little concerning. I called Bud, and he made me go to the hospital. He was like my mama, and he said, you're going to the hospital. I'd had some issues about a year back with my heart, and so didn't take any chances. But anyhow, I went to the hospital, and you know, one of the things about recovery is you develop some friendships, some relationships that are completely different than what you've ever experienced back in your other way of life. Bud met me at the hospital, and he sat with, I'm like, get out of here. I don't need you here, you know. And he sat with me through all the tests and everything like that. And after the tests were done, I'm like, go. You got to go to Celebrate Recovery. He goes, no, I'm staying with you till they let you go, you know. And it's wonderful to have friends that will sit with you through difficult times. And yesterday, a group of us guys went over to pray and sit with Court. I want you to keep him in your prayers. If you don't know Court, he's one of our leaders, and he's going through some chemo right now that's just really kicking his butt. And so keep him in your prayers, will you? Last week, a good friend of mine from Old Bruce happened to be in town, and he was coming to check out Celebrate Recovery because he's wanting to start one in Arizona. And he was in Miami, made a trip over here for a couple days. We had dinner with him. And then Sunday, we go, guess who's speaking tonight, Bruce? You are, you know. And he came up here last week and knocked it out of the park, I heard. I haven't seen the recording yet. I'm looking forward to that, but just really want to thank him for that. So tonight, I want to continue talking about something we started last month, because we're talking about the seventh principle. And the seventh principle really covers two steps. It's the 10th and the 11th step of AA and NA. And the seventh principle, it talks about the fact that we reserve a daily time with God for self-examination, Bible reading, and prayer in order to know God and His will for my life and to gain the power to follow His will. And the 11th step is sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God, and the power to carry that out. So last month, and some of you were here, some of you weren't, the name of the message was Addressing the Mess. I don't know if you remember that, Addressing the Mess. And I was able to talk about that topic because, you know, I think all of us could say, I know a mess when I see one, because I've been one, you know, or I am one, you know, or I'm a real mess. I think some of you here tonight are going, man, I just want to change my life. You know, my life is a mess, and we've all been there. Tonight, I want to talk about this 11th step, where we really look, there's a part of this step, it kind of breaks down into three parts, but it talks about praying for the knowledge of God's will for us and the power to carry that out. And, you know, I've been around this program since I was 22, and that was a long, long time ago. And I've been in a lot of meetings over the course of the years. And I've heard some really great talks on this step about what prayer and meditation is, about understanding and knowing the will of God. And then I've even heard some ridiculous things like, you can't know God's will for your life. And, you know, I've heard that multiple times, that there's a group in the recovery rooms that say, well, you really can't know God's will for your life. You just kind of got to do the next right thing. And it might sound similar, but I don't think it is at all. Tonight, I hope to bring a little bit of clarity on understanding God's will for our lives. And I think most of us would agree that today, where you are in your life, wherever you are in your life, but today is a result or the sum of the decisions that you've made up until this point. Would you guys agree with that? You know, life happens to us sometimes. There's things that we are powerless over. But man, did I make a lot of bad decisions. You know, one of my favorite verses comes out of Ephesians 5, and it says, be careful how you live, not as unwise, but as wise. And the word careful was like, I wasn't careful with how I lived my life. I was careless about how I lived my life. I lived as if, you know, nothing was going to kill me. You know, like I was going to live forever when I was in my 20s. I had this like no fear sort of a thing. And as you get older, that changes a lot. And time starts to matter in how you live your life. And especially if you've relapsed and you come back and you relapse again, each time you come back, I think you say, man, something's got to change. Why do I keep making these stupid, unwise decisions in my life, right? Some of you are here tonight and, you know, you're only 3 days into, you know, not having a drink or a drug in your system. And you don't want to drink and drug anymore. Or maybe it's a hang-up or some hurt that you just keep, you know, just keep turning over in your head and in your life, and it manages your life, and your life is unmanageable. So tonight, I think that if I can help in any way somebody to make better decisions or choices for their life out of my experiences, that would be successful for me. Tonight, we're having people be baptized, men and women who are who are making a public statement about the fact, you know what? That was my old life. And going forward with the life I choose to live, I want God to be the director of my path. I don't want to keep ending up in the same places. The insanity of the second step is, repeating the same thing over and over again, expecting different results, isn't it? And each time we go back there, we think this time will be different. I can manage the outcome, and we start to lie to ourselves. So how do we discover what God's will is for our life? Most of you know I teach purpose-driven life at Salvation Army, and I am so firmly rooted in the fact that God's got a plan and a purpose for my life, and He's working through me and in me to accomplish His purposes through my life today. I do not do that perfectly by any stretch of the matter. However, a surrendered life to God is a life that God can use. A surrendered life to God is a life that will amaze you and blow you away if you will learn to trust in the process. So I want to look at a verse tonight, and it comes out of Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. And I just want to look at the last sentence of that verse and throw it up there. It says, yep, that was it. He will make your path straight. He will make your path straight. Say that with me. He will make your path straight. I love that because it talks about the fact that there's direction that God will bring into your life. And we see this happening all around the recovery community, especially here at Celebrate Recovery. We see people come out of these shipwrecked lives and get on a path, and 4 or 5 years later, they're married to the person that they love, they're raising children, or they've got a career, they're involved in leadership, they're involved in management, whatever that is. But it's like they're unrecognizable. I saw somebody this morning here that I haven't seen in a while, and it was just amazing to see her. I wouldn't have even recognized her, other than the fact that it was like God's touched her life, and there was a radiance that just sort of came out of that person, And that's what keeps me coming back. That's what keeps me coming back. So if you look into God's will, if you go to a concordance, for instance, and for some of you, that's a concordance is like a study guide of the Bible, and it's or a commentary, and it's where these theologians, these brainiacs, basically have taken the words of God and tried to explain them on the fullest measure of what they mean. But if you were to look up God's will in a concordance, you would see that it breaks down to however God's will appears in the Bible, it appears in one of 3 different categories. The first category you will see is the providential will of God. The next category is the moral will of God. And then you'll see that it talks about the personal will of God. And most of us are really more interested in just the personal will of God. What does God want me to do? Does He want me to take that job in Cleveland, stay here? Does He want me to do this? Should I go out with her or her? Should I pay my bills on time? Whatever. We're looking for this direction in our lives, and it's sort of where we sort of look at it in a micro perspective of things. And we do want to know, yet God doesn't give us a crystal ball to say, this is how your life would play out if you were submitted to me, and this is how your life would play out if it wasn't submitted to me. However, we can look back at our lives and say, this is how it looks in an unsubmitted life. Can't we? We can say that. I can say that. Because for many years, my best thinking was how I operated. There's these sayings like, every time I drank, I got drunk. Every time I got drunk, I broke out in handcuffs, I mean, it's just sort of these things would happen in our lives as a result of my best thinking. And I realized many times that my best thinking was the thing that got me there, the decisions that I made, and I need to find a better way of thinking. And we hear this in the program, that whether you got a drinking or a drug problem, it really roots down to a mental thinking problem in a way. I've got a thinking problem, and the solution lies in a spiritual solution for that. So the providential will of God. The providential will of God are the things that God is going to do no matter what. See, God's got a plan, whether you're in step with it or not. There's certain things that God has done, is doing, and is going to do because he's God. And if that sounds weird to you, there's things that you're going to do because you're you, and God has a plan and a purpose that's going to happen whether you're involved in it or not. In the scriptures, in Galatians 4:4, it says, "But when the set time had fully come, God sent his Son into the world." See, God was going to do that no matter what. Whether you prayed for that to happen, whether people prayed for that to happen, or no matter what, God was going to bring Christ into this world, a deliverer. That was his plan. God was also going to create a nation called Israel. And he talked to Abraham, and he used Abraham. And what's so interesting about the providential will of God is that he's moving, he's operating, he's purposeful on this planet today, just as he was in the past. But when the angel appeared to Mary, he said, "Mary, blessed are you amongst women, because God has chosen you to bring about his Son." And in the same way, God's got a plan and a purpose for your life, and he wants to use you to accomplish his providential will. Isn't that cool? Isn't that exciting? I mean, there's areas of my life as I have tried to surrender and submit my life on a daily basis, that as I look back over the past few years of my life, or the past 10 years of my life, I have this sense of gratitude that God could use someone like me to accomplish some of the things that he has done through me. And think about it for yourself. The fact that we're in recovery, and the fact that we could have a conversation with one person that might change the whole trajectory of their life for the rest of their life, and their children's lives, and their children's life, has this effect that reaches beyond what we can even imagine. As the stone is cast on the pond, there's this ripple effect. But God wants to use you to accomplish his providential will on this planet. There's the moral will of God, and most of you know about the moral will of God. It's the one we kind of wish wasn't there. And I don't even have to sit up here and get into detail about the moral will of God, because I think, deep down inside all of us, he has planted this consciousness, this God presence, this God's DNA in our lives to know what's right and what's wrong. But in case we missed out on it, we've got the 10 Commandments. We've got 640 other things that they came up with. But, to say, God, I really want that job, but I'm going to have to lie to get that job. Is that cool with you? You don't have to pray that prayer, all right? Let me tell you that right now. But there are some of you who think, maybe he'll give me that blessing, When it comes down to the moral will of God, deep down inside, we all know what that is. But we wrestle real hard with the moral will of God. But if you take the providential will of God, there's this thing called a plumb bob. Any carpenters in here or bricklayers, they know what a plumb bob is. It's kind of like a level. And if you hold it, it gives a straight vertical. It's weighted, so it gives an absolutely perfect vertical line, or else they can use it this way, and it'll give a perfect horizontal line. And that's where they will start their foundation, and they will build up, and they will build out, making sure that it's square, because that's important when you're building a building. And the providential and the moral will of God is a lot like that when it comes down to understanding what the personal will of God is. Because if you understand that God's at work in the world and he wants to use you, and you understand what the moral will of God is, and you apply it to your life, the personal will of God will begin to be revealed to you, and that's been my experience. That it first comes with obedience. That it first comes with, I really want to do that, but I know that that's not your plan for my life, God. It's saying no sometimes, a lot of times. We were pretty easy at going with yes most of the time. Seemed like a good idea at the time, and we have a bunch of jokes I can't say up here about that. But the personal will of God, going back to that scripture, it says, trust in the Lord with what? All of your heart, and lean not on your own understandings, but in all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make your path straight. In closing, I just want to give you something to kind of think about for the next week, that this is about growing in your faith. That as you seek in the 11th step to know God's will for your life, and you are prayerful about that, he will make things clearer for you. But God's not about giving you decisions to make, or the word for it would really be like, let me contemplate that, God, and think if that's a good idea for my life or not. God's not going to play that game. God's will is usually very clear, whether this is right or wrong, or whether this is the path. And he brings people into our lives to help us with this. It's not for consideration. Quick story, about 10 years ago when I was early in my recovery this last time, I met a woman who was this incredible woman, and we became friends. And for the next 5 years, actually, as we met, I was coming out of a relationship and really going through the pain of that relationship, and she was also exiting a relationship and was sort of in a painful process, a grieving process. And we met on a bowling league, and she was a realtor and I was a realtor, and we just kind of hit it off. There was this attraction. And for the next 5 years, we were these incredibly good friends, like I'd never really had before. Purely a platonic relationship with a lot of sexual tension, if you catch my drift. There was a lot of innuendo and a lot of, sort of playing around verbally, but we never crossed the line, because honestly, I wanted to honor God with my life, and there was something inside of me that knew, if God had a woman for me, this probably wasn't the woman based on some of the things, even though she was wonderful. And, I thought it might be a good idea, because the opportunity arose where we could live together and save money. And we did. I lived in one bedroom, or I was in one bedroom, and she was in another bedroom, and we slept apart. We're never intimate for about 8 months. And we began talking about, sort of this, I was sort of like this platonic husband, and she was kind of like a platonic wife without the intimacy. And one day we decided that, there should be some intimacy here. And the rest is, the story that you guys have all experienced, right? This is not just my story, it's everyone in here mostly. And I continued to go down that path. The end of the story is that it didn't end well. And there was a lot of pain and a lot of suffering. And, but deep down inside, I knew that this is not the woman that God had planned for me. but I wanted to convince God that, you know what, you must have made a mistake, you know? Because look at her, you know? Look at her, you know? It's, I had to learn a painful lesson through that. Fortunately, we got married and we got divorced. It lasted about 1.5 years, and I was sober through the whole thing, and I stayed sober after that. But it was tough. It was really tough. Last week, she moved off to Phoenix. Last week, she was in town, and we had dinner together as friends again, and it was really nice to see her. But I think we would have been better off just staying friends. I think we would have been just better off staying friends. I think that was probably God's will and plan for my life. It set me back in a lot of ways. I'll end there with that, but just in closing, Philip Yancey wrote a new book, and he said this, and this is really kind of the essence of what we're about here tonight in baptism. He says, you know, I don't get to know God and then do his will. I get to know him more deeply by doing his will. See, there's a deal here. We can't just sit there and say, what's your will, God? What's your will for my life, God? And then do what I want to do. That is, you know, and thinking that, well, you know, God, you know, God must have got it wrong. No, we have to obey. There was a song that I learned in Sunday school when I was a little kid, and it said, trust and obey, for there's no other way to be happy in Jesus than to trust and obey. And I love that little song because it means a lot to me today. Obedience is hard, folks. It's really hard. Knowing the will of God, perhaps the people who are going to be baptized tonight have made a decision. They made a decision with their lives that they're going to publicly make a statement to you and to God and to themselves and to their families that, you know what? I've surrendered my life to Christ. I've died to my old life, and I'm going to be raised up like Christ was into a new life. There's a sanctification thing that happens. And it will only happen for as long as we continue to sometimes take an insult for the fact of the way we're living our lives. You know, in the 12th step and the 8th principle, it says, blessed are those who are persecuted for their faith. That's what that's talking about. Because sometimes being a Christian isn't cool. Sometimes being in recovery isn't cool. And it's not like we got to take a headline out for everybody, but it's going to be in the way that we live out our lives. So I'm going to ask, we're going to do this kind of cool tonight, or a little bit different. Patty received her ordination about 1 year ago at the ministry, School of Ministry. And because ladies are always first, we're going to do the ladies first. And we're going to have Patty come on up here. And that's right. We're going to do a group photo before everybody's soaking wet and their hair's all messy. Except for Andy's hair doesn't get messy. But anyhow, come on up, you guys that are getting baptized.